Hello and welcome to Elemental Hardware Enrichment. My name is Aiden and today we're going to be building a step stool. Before we get started with building, let's go ahead and introduce the supplies that we're going to need for this project. For our step stool, we're going to need a damp rag, a bottle of glue, a hardware tray, some sandpaper, a hammer block, and our safety glasses. Let's go ahead and put those on now. Now that we've introduced all of our supplies, let's talk about the tools we're going to need for this project. So I have my toolkit right here. I'm going to go ahead and open it up and take out the tools that I need. For this project, the only tool that I'm going to need is a hammer. Now that I've got my hammer, let me go ahead and close up my toolkit and get it out of my way. All right, I've got my supplies, I've got my tools, so the next step will be to open up the box and talk about what we're going to find inside. Let's go ahead and open up our box. To do that, we're going to be using the claw of the hammer, and we're going to be sliding the hammer claw down the tape where the two box flaps meet to split it open. Once we split the tape, we can go ahead and grab the corners and pry them up. Now that we've got our box open, we're going to start by taking out the packing paper and opening it up to make sure that there's no small pieces wrapped up in it before we get it out of our way. Now that we've got our packing paper out, let's go ahead and talk about our wood parts. The first part we've got is this piece here, and this is going to be our cross member. Next we have these two pieces here, and these will be the legs for our step stool. The very last piece we're going to take out looks like this, and this is going to be the top for our step stool. Now we've got all of our pieces, so let's go ahead and get them out of our way. All right, we've gotten everything out of the box, so the next step will be to stand all of our wood parts. Let's go ahead and get started sanding. The first thing that we're going to do is grab our hammer block, and we're going to be placing it onto the soft side of the sandpaper and then folding the edges of the paper over the hammer block to form our sanding block. We're then going to begin sanding our wood parts. I'm going to start by focusing on the end grain edges, which is this edge here where you can see the different layers. Let's go ahead and sand that down nicely. Once I've sanded the end grain edges, I can go ahead and sand the veneered edges on the top and bottom of my piece. So let's do that now. When you're doing that, you want to be sure to try to sand with the grain of the piece so you don't end up scratching your wood part. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, now we can go ahead and sand the end grain and veneered edges of our three remaining pieces. Alright, now that we've sanded the end grain and veneered edges of each of our pieces, there's a few more parts of each piece that we want to focus on to sand that will make the assembly process a little bit easier. The first thing that I want to highlight is going to be on our leg pieces as well as our cross members. And these are going to be these pieces here at the top or on the sides of the cross member. And these are what are called tenons. The tenons are a protruding piece that will fit into another piece that's called a mortise. And the leg actually has both tenons and mortises. So you can see these tenons here are designed to fit into a mortise that looks something like this. So the tenons on the cross member will actually end up fitting into the mortises on our legs. But before we put those pieces together, we want to sand all of those a little bit to make sure we have a nice smooth connection. The first thing that we're going to be doing is just lightly sanding the edges of each of our tenons. So I'm going to take my sandpaper, I'm going to place it at an angle against one of the tenons and sand back and forth for just a few seconds. Once I've done that, I'm going to move on to the next one. and I'm going to do it on all 4 corners. And I don't want to sand too much because I don't want to take off too much of the tenon, just a little bit to kind of round over those corners. Let's go ahead and do the next tenon on this piece as well. And let's go ahead and do the tenons on our next leg piece. And then we can sand the tenons on our cross member. Once we've sanded all of our tenons, now we want to go ahead and sand out the mortises as well, just to clear out any extra wood material that might be in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to be removing the sandpaper from the block and rolling it up tightly. Once I've rolled it up, I can go ahead and place it into this opening on the mortise and begin to sand that out. And again, I'm just sanding all the way around the mortise to kind of clear out any extra material that might be in there. So now I'm going to do that on the 3 remaining mortises on this piece. Now that I've sanded out the mortises on the top, I'm going to do it on the mortises on my legs as well. Alright, I finished sanding, so now I can go ahead and take my rag and wipe away any dust from my pieces. I also want to wipe up my work surface just to get any dust on there as well. Alright, I've sanded and cleaned up all of my pieces, so now I'm ready to get started with my build. The first step will be to attach our legs to our cross member. Let's go ahead and get started attaching our legs to our cross member. So the first thing I'm going to do is grab one of my legs and set it onto the work surface so that the mortises face up. I'm then going to grab my cross member and stand it up tall so that the tenons on one side face up. Now I'm going to be fitting these tenons into the mortises on the leg, but before we do that we need to spread some glue. I'm going to be spreading glue onto these edges on either side of the tenons. I don't want to get glue directly on top of the tenons because that's not going to be making contact with the legs, but I do want to make sure to cover every other surface around the tenons with glue. So let's go ahead and open up our glue bottle. We're going to remove the red cap and place it into our tray. And then I'm going to begin spreading glue along these edges on either side of my tenons. Now the only thing that's going to be holding this project together, other than the mortise and the tenons, is the glue. So we want to make sure to use plenty of glue to cover this whole surface. So let's go ahead and spread that glue out evenly, making sure we get it all over every surface around these tenons. Once we've got the glue spread out, we can wipe off our finger. And we can also use our rag to clean up any glue that may have spilled over the sides. I'm then going to go ahead and I'm going to line this piece up so that the glued edges of the tenons align with the mortises in the leg. But the orientation is very important. You see this flat edge here of the cross member must align with this edge here of the leg that has the tenons. So I want to double check that these two pieces are going to align flush and perpendicular before I attach my cross member. Now that I've got everything lined up and I've double checked my orientation, I'm going to go ahead and tap this in using my hammer. But I don't want to tap directly onto the piece because I may end up damaging it. So instead, I'm going to be using my hammer block to protect the piece while I'm hammering. I'm going to set it right over the top of the piece and I'm going to evenly tap both sides of these tenons to set this piece into the leg. So let's go ahead and do that now. So the first couple of taps will go ahead and set this piece in place, and now I can continue hammering until the cross member sits flush on top of my leg. So let's go ahead and get started. Now a if you're having trouble getting it in from this side, you can also try flipping it over and tapping the other side of the piece to see if that helps. And just like that, I'm able to close up the gaps and I have my two pieces attached. So now I can go ahead and grab my rag and wipe up any excess glue. And now I can go ahead and attach my remaining leg piece. So I'm going to move this off to the side for just a second and grab my remaining leg. And then I'm going to go ahead and apply glue to this up-facing edge of the cross member between the tenons. So let's do that just like we did before. All right, I've got the glue on there, so I'm going to spread it out evenly using a finger. Now I've got my glue spread, I can go ahead and set the leg over the top of this cross member so that it aligns over the tenons. And I want to make sure that my two legs are symmetrical and that they're both going to be perpendicular with this flat edge. Once I've got it set into place, I'm going to go ahead and place my hammer block right over top and tap it in using my hammer. Once I've got it mostly set, I can go ahead and flip this piece over and hammer from the other side as well, just to make sure it's fully set and flush. And just like that, I'm going to go ahead and check for any gaps, and this piece looks good. Actually, it does look like I have a little bit of a gap, so I'm going to go ahead and hammer just a little bit more right over that gap. And just like that, I've closed it up nicely, so I can go ahead and wipe up any excess glue. All right, we've attached our legs to our cross member, so we're ready to move on to our next step, which will be to attach our top. All right, let's go ahead and finish up our project by attaching the top. We're going to attach this in a very similar way as how we attach our legs to our cross member, by attaching the top so that the mortises on the top fit over the tenons in the legs. But before we do that, let's go ahead and spread some glue between each of the tenons on these flat surfaces on our legs, as well as this flat up-facing surface on our cross member. So let's go ahead and spread that glue now. Once you've got your glue on there, you're going to go ahead and spread it evenly using your finger. Now we can go ahead and wipe our finger clean, and then we're going to go ahead and place our top right over our glued edge and begin to align the tenons so that they fit into the mortises on the top. Once we've got it all lined up, we can begin to set it with our hammer. Now once again, we want to use our hammer block so that we don't damage our piece. So I'm going to start over this hole here, I'm going to line it up, and I'm going to set it with the hammer. Once I have that one set, I'm going to go ahead and set the hole right next to it, and then this one over here. And if you notice that it's not going in, you may need to realign things. So let's go ahead and make sure this is all lined up before we continue hammering. All right, now we can go ahead and tap it down. Let's go ahead and evenly tap all the way around our piece so we can set the top in place. Now if we want to, we can also flip this over and tap from the other side to really secure everything together. And the last thing we want to do is just check to make sure there are no gaps between our pieces. And everything's looking good, so let's go ahead and wipe up any excess glue. All right, and just like that, we finished our step stool. So now I can go ahead and get this decorated, and I'll be right back. All right, I got my step stool all decorated, and I think it turned out really nice. So now I can take it home and use it to help me reach the high places around my kitchen or in the bathroom, wherever I might need it. I really appreciate you guys stopping by to build this with me on Elemental Hardware Enrichment. My name is Aiden, and I'm looking forward to seeing you on the next one.